Welcome, everybody. Hello. Thank you for being with us. This is Spirit Matters, your daily Bhakti Center Gita podcast, coming at you live from New York. I'm here with Chita Gopi and our beautiful live studio audience that joins us from around the world. Our good friend and tri host, Kishore Chandra's not with us this week. So it's just us. How you doing, Chita?
Trying something new. I am surrounded by mercy.
You're surrounded by mercy.
That's what I'm going with today.
That's your new MO?
Yeah. Rather than like, oh no, I'm good. No, I'm good.
Surrounded by mercy. I can dig that. I'm personally doing okay, but I appreciate that sentiment. No, it's a good one. It's a really great one. Surrounded by anything's particularly merciful that you're noticing?
No, I'm like, I'm up, I'm breathing. These are amazing things that we take for granted.
We definitely take them for granted, that's for sure. Um, and so, well, I'm glad you're seeing that way. Thank you. Thank you for reminding everyone that we're surrounded by mercy because it's really easy to lose sight of all of that. Very, very, very much so. Um, and our dear friend Arjuna also is in need of that reminder as well as we dive into our to the Bhagavad Gita. We've been reading the Gita, and we are in the first chapter still. First chapter, verse one, first word. We've been discussing for a few days now. But it's rich. It's rich, rich. A lot of beautiful stuff. Um, Bhagavad Gita. Uh, we're really just kind of we're still in this beginning of Dhritarashtra, the king, asking his charioteer to describe what's going on in the battle, and then Sanjay is starting to try to pump himself up and his other generals and army men. There were no women fighting in the army at that time, several thousand years ago. So
Actually,
there was. Did I not? Did I miss someone?
I mean, there's Shikandi.
Was she on the Battle of Kurukshetra?
Shikandi, yeah, they name her. Well, at that point, it's questionable. Shikandi had gotten a situation. And but yeah, Shikandi is on the battlefield at this point.
There you go.
But at this point, also Shikandi's a man. So
Shikandi's what?
Shikandi's a man at this point.
Okay, they were.
Vedically,
These things are not new.
not at all. Actually, the ninth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam has at least like three different examples of like unconventional lives. But and Shikandi is not even one of them. It mentioned in ninth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. But Shikandi was born to King Drupad. So, same king that had a revenge plot that had a son that wanted to kill Drona that we were talking about the other day. And Duryodhan is kind of like poking Drona with this information like, "Oh, look at the other army that's been so expertly arranged by your intelligent disciple, the son of Drupad, who was prophesized when he was born to kill you." So that same Drupad has several children. One of them is Dristadumna, who is a boy, and Drupad says, "I need a son to kill Drona, this great weapons teacher." And so
Hmm.
he gets Dristadumna, and then he gets a daughter named Draupadi, who will come to factor in. We'll explain that a little bit later. But before those two children, he also has another daughter named Shikandi, or Shikandini at birth. And when he gets this daughter, he was hoping for a son, so he kind of raises her like a son. And this daughter, Shikandani, kind of has this inner revenge plot against Bhishma, who we'll be speaking to in a couple of verses. And so Shikandani was formerly a princess named Amba who had another revenge plot. She wanted to kill Bhishma, and it was a whole big ordeal. And so Amba prays to many, many people. She finally starts praying to Lord Shiva, and they give her a garland of lotuses. And they say, whoever wears this garland will be able to kill Bhishma. And so Shikandani travels from province to province trying to find out if anybody will wear this garland. At this point, this is Amba. And Amba comes to the court of King Drupad and she says, will anybody wear this garland? And everybody's like, actually, nobody really wants enmity with Bhishma. He's kind of too good. He's like too good of a warrior, too moralistic of a person. Nobody really wants enmity with him. Sorry. So Amba gets angry and throws the garland around a pillar and leaves. She goes back to the drawing board, continues praying to Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva says, in another birth, you'll kill Bhishma. Don't worry about it. And Amba says, well, what if I don't remember? Lord Shiva says, don't worry. I'll give you the blessing that you'll remember. No problem. She says, fine. Lord Shiva leaves. Amba builds a fire, a pyre, and jumps into it because she decides, I don't want to wait that long. I'd like to speed up this karmic process. Amba then takes another birth as this Shikandini. Drupad raises her kind of as a boy. And so one day she sees this garland in this on this pillar, takes the garland off, puts it around herself. Drupad is kind of furious. What are you doing? How could you do this? Why are you moving things? Why are you touching things? And she says, don't worry, father. This is what I've been born to do. Interestingly enough, Shikandani grows up, still technically a girl, raised as a boy. Everybody in the kingdom thinks that this is a boy. Time for the child's marriage. Drupad goes and gets Shikandani married to a princess. The princess comes. Everybody's there. There's a nice big wedding. Everybody's happy, except the princess feels like, well, what? Why isn't Shikandi coming closer to me? Like, why aren't we connecting? What's happening? The princess finds out. The princess tells one of her maidservants, I think Shikandani is a boy, is a girl. That maidservant tells their friends tell their friends. The words get back to the princess's father. Now this other king is like, I've been lied to and cheated and duped. I'm gonna wage war. That other king comes and starts to wage war on Drupad. Drupad says, oh no, what am I gonna do? Tells Shikandi, like, I don't know what we're gonna do. Now we're in the middle of a war. Shikandi goes to the forest and has the quintessential existential crisis. I'm a disgrace to my family. I'm going to kill everybody I love. I can't do this anymore. It's better that I end my life. I can't do this. And there, Shikandi meets a yaksha. And this yaksha they're kind of like celestial beings. Some of them can be a little mischievous. They're almost like if you think of in Shakespeare when he's got like the fae, kind of almost like that. They can shapeshift, they can do whatever they like. They're servants of the devas. And so she meets this yaksha, and the yaksha says, well, what's wrong? And she says, well, I was raised as a boy, but I'm really a girl. Now there's going to be a war, and I'm going to be in trouble, and I'm going to be the destroyer of my family, and I can't do this. Better that I give up my life. And the yaksha says, well, actually, hold on now. You don't have to go that far. Why don't we exchange genders? Shikandi says, what? It's like, yeah, you can take my gender. I'll take your gender. Whenever you're done, come back, give it back. Because things were that simple in Vedic times. Like, funny, interestingly enough. And so Shikandi says, okay, well, that seems like an anecdote to my problem. So they switch genders. Shikandi goes back home. The king comes. And what the king does is this king who wanted to wage war, Drupad says, wait. I actually do have a son. You shouldn't wage war right now. Shikandi is a boy. Don't worry about it. And so the king says, well, I'm going to send maidservants to check. Now, Mahabharata does not elaborate on what this checking means, but he sends maidservants to check. And Mahabharata says that they report back happily that Shikandi is a man. Don't worry about it. Everything's fine.
We checked.
We checked. In quotes. And so then King Drupad's happy. This other king is happy. He goes back home. War is averted. Meanwhile, in the forest, this yaksha is supposed to be a servant of the god of wealth, Kuvera. Kuvera comes to the forest expecting assistance, help, whatever. And this yaksha is nowhere to be found. And so Kuvera is calling out, it's like, where are you, you nonsense? Like, where is your attention? And the yaksha says, well, actually, I would have come to serve you, but I'm a woman right now, so I can't. It's awkward. It's a little weird for me. I'm taking a day, And so Kuvera says, how did you get yourself into this situation? Like, you're supposed to be doing a job, and instead you're like solving other people's problems. And so, because of him not minding his business, Kuvera curses him. He says, stay as you are. And so the Yaksha says, well, okay, guess I'm a woman now. Shikandi comes back to the forest, ready to make good on the bargain, tells the Yaksha, we can switch back now. The Yaksha says, well, actually, we can't, because while you were gone, I kind of got cursed. And so Shikandi is thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And the Yaksha says something that I always thought was really profound. The Yaksha says, well, what are you going to do about it? It all seems like it was set up by the will of the Supreme Lord in inevitable time anyway. It's all fine.
Hmm.
So Shikandi says, okay, yeah, I guess it's fine. What should I do? He's like, yeah, go back home, live your life. It's fine. Shikandi goes back home to live his new life. The Yaksha's there living her new life, and everybody goes on about their business. This factors in deeply because Shikandi is now on this battlefield, but Bhishma happens to know the entire history. And
Hmm.
Bhishma has taken a vow not to fight with anybody who is below his caliber, which includes Shudras, charioteers, women, all of the like. He's like, I'm not going to lessen my bless you. I'm not going to lessen my abilities by fighting with somebody who is of a lower caliber fighter than me. I'm just not going to do it. So he's got all of these stringent rules, and all of the Pandavas, including Krishna, know that Shikandi is on the battlefield, and so Bhishma has already taken this vow. So Bhishma actually, if Shikandi's there, Bhishma won't fight,
Hmm.
and they use this to their advantage later on Krishna's direct order. So they describe Shikandi as a great fighter in one of the next few verses. But Krishna also pumps up Shikandi within the Mahabharata, talks to Shikandi to like, you have an expert part to play in this battlefield,
Hmm.
in this battle, because no one can defeat Bhishma. But unfortunately, he's going to have to go. And if he has to go, the only way we can do it is by putting you in front of everybody else. He'll put down his weapons, he won't fight. Then we can use that to our advantage and get him off the battlefield, take him out of the battle, disarm him, disable him, immobilize him, and then that will be the end of the first general of the Kuru army. So long story short, Vedic science is much more complex than we give it credit for. But also, I mean, sometimes there were women on the battlefield.
There are. We just don't always notice it. What do you what do you pull away from that story that you find valuable or that you bring into your life?
I've always taken from that story that we decide to put so many values on God that do not actually exist. We put so many values. God wants this, God wants that, God would like this, God would dislike that, God wants this. And from reading Srimad Bhagavatam and from
Hmm.
reading so many of these histories, God simply doesn't care. God
Hmm.
doesn't care. God is worrying about so many other things, the states of our souls and reconnecting this relationship. That he just doesn't care about all of the things that we are giving so much uh, moral importance to. So
Hmm.
when we kind of look at the things that God really doesn't care about, it starts to change us in the realm of religion. You know, if religion is not keeping
Hmm.
me in this box, if God doesn't care enough to keep me in this box, then what is going to keep me being a good human? What will keep me
Yeah.
being moralistic?
Hmm.
And then that comes down to us and how we treat other living entities.
There is a word um that I remember hearing. It's called punc- punctilious. Punctilious is a word where you defined as showing greater attention to detail or correct behavior. Specifically, I've heard it defined in religious and spiritual circles as substituting major details for minor details. And so you learn to, rather than understand the overarching greater principles of something, you get hyper focused on a minutia or a detail that in some ways may almost seem irrelevant, but that becomes the focal point.
Yeah.
And everything is judged according to this minute, almost somewhat random detail that you've determined is so important. And it also, it was mentioned, I was listening to, it was a seminar series about when people have a certain moral failing in their own life that they can't grapple with,
Mm-hmm.
they therefore then latch on to some minor principle, like they have like a large moral failing, and then therefore they latch onto some minor detail that they're doing right, quote unquote right, and then they uplift that to like the most important thing as a means to like set a new standard that they can feel they're adhering to,
Mm.
and a way to like bring other people down. And so it's like, rather than focusing on the big important things, we're now having these huge debates, or these huge unsettlings of families and communities and governments based off of small things that we've sort of just hyper focused on.
Yeah. And I do understand that it can create a big deal of cognitive dissonance when you've got these
Mm,
moral failings, and it really comes down to us feeling like, can we allow ourselves to be wrong, or can we allow ourselves to make a mistake and also realize, and I was just kind of telling my daughter this yesterday, I was like,
mm,
she gets really hard on herself because she's such a perfectionist. I was like, okay, Nandi, I want you to repeat after me. I can make a mistake. And she's like, I was like, come on, you can say it. She's like, I can make a mistake. I was like, I can be wrong. She was like, I can be wrong. And I was like, and mom will still love me. And then she was crying. Like, and mom will still love me. I was like, and Krishna will still love you too. Like, you can,
mm,
when we get into this feeling of
mm,
we can't breathe the wrong way, walk the wrong way, talk the wrong way, any of those things the wrong way. But we can make mistakes. We can allow ourselves to be wrong in a sense. And also, what is also true is that God will love us.
mm,
God is not judging us on all of these things. There are so many things in Bhagavad Gita that he's about to say that let us know that he's not judging us based on all of the lives that we've ever had. Because if that were true, who knows where we'd be.
mm,
But he simply isn't caring about the minutia.
mm,
And so much of it is minutia for him, which is crazy to think about. We are going through all of these incredible in intense things. I was just reading a meditation from Bhakti Tirtha Swami, and he was listing all of these things. There are millions of people that died in a Holocaust. There were millions of people that were brought over as slaves, millions of people that died in this famine or this war or this whatever. And at the end of each section, he ends it with, and God, where were you? And finally, at the end, he says, actually, it's not God, where were you? Where were we? Where
mm,
was our humanity and our compassion? Where were we in the midst of all of this? Where were our hearts? Where was
mm,
our attention? What were we focusing on?
mm,
It's not as though God set all of these things into motion. We set those things into motion and then we push it back on God. Where were you? Why didn't you save people? But the real question
mm,
is, where were we? Where were our hearts? Where was our compassion? What were we focusing on?
mm. Yeah, I really appreciate what you're mentioning in terms of what is important, the things that the idea of being judged or making a mistake, quote unquote mistake, and the idea of I mean, you made a couple separate points. I'm going back a point. I appreciate the point you're making just now in terms of like, where were we? Where's our compassion? How are we as a society playing into the idea of being change makers, of taking responsibility to what we as humans have done to the earth and to our humanity and etc. And I think that's a point all in and of itself that we can discuss. I'm going to dial it back one more point that you mentioned that you were talking about with Nandi. Um, and when we think about, I was thinking of this morning about the idea of just the word God itself, and how triggering it can be for so many people, and what that means, and the idea of like healing our relationship with God by rediscovering, redefining, reassessing what God means or who God is. And when we think about the idea of God, so much we find in Vedic literatures is the idea of God not possessing any material qualities. So not the near guna is the word often sometimes used, not possessing material qualities. So the idea of us importing a material consciousness onto the supreme spiritual being that is like measuring us according to some standard of behavior that you need to match up to in order to qualify for my love. It's a false projection. There's a false projection that's taking place that is really a projecting of our consciousness onto the supreme person. And for us to be able to like start to peel back the assumptions that we've made or other people have caused us to make about God, um, it really gets in the way of spiritual development.
It's true. And I think, it was you actually, Doyle, who said one definition for Maya was
To
measuring.
measure.
Yeah. And so when we get into this qualitative measuring, that's actually Maya's domain, not
Hmm.
Krishna's domain. And when we look at this material world was run by Maya, that qualitative measuring, you've got to measure up. We're always measuring one person against another and weighing in and what's the reward, and you get love or I revoke this love.
Hmm.
That's a material world viewpoint. Krishna simply does not work like that. And he tells Arjuna several times, like, I just don't work like that. And
Hmm.
Arjuna is going to try and make sense of that in his mind and try and make peace with it, but over and over again Krishna just keeps saying, I don't work the way you think I work, bro. Like, that's just not
Hmm.
how God works. And so, yes, like you said, this entire Bhagavad Gita is revolutionizing the concept and the personality of God, because in this whole measuring and in projecting our material qualities onto God, we've taken the personality of God away. And I think
Hmm.
it's so important and interesting that Srila Prabhupada mentions the personality of Godhead so many times. God is a person, God has a personality, which means that his personality is bigger and also outside of anything you could ever comprehend.
Hmm. And I appreciate just bringing it back to this because we're wrapping up here on time. A lot of this discussion started with Shikandi, who's mentioned later on in the Gita. I'm looking at it now. It's verses 16 through 18. The great fighter Shikandi, um, and the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. These first, 20 some verses are about observing the armies. I mean, that's the name that Prabhupada gave this first chapter of the Gita: observing the armies on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And we get these lists of names of Bhishma and Karna and Kripa and Ashvatthama and Vikarna and Duryodhana and Drupad and um, Bhima and Drishtadyumna. I'm just reading all of these names here. And so, and then Arjuna in a little bit is going to go and bring himself between the two armies to observe them, up close. And then that's the onset of this complete breakdown that he has. And I always find it interesting whenever you were reading like a spiritual text and you get like these lists of names and you're just kind of like why are they doing this? Like if every word is supposed to be like this spiritual instruction, like
Yeah.
why are we getting this like list of names? And it was so interesting when you told the story of Shikandi, because in one sense it's just a name you just read, you just you'll go past and you read, but at the same time you realize that every one of these names is a story.
Ev-
Every one of these names is a journey. Every one of these names is an individual soul that has a relationship with the Supreme and is on that path. Um, and when you see all of these people assembled in this great battlefield, you get a context of like what's at stake, the gravity of the situation. And I think that when we, you know, I don't know if I've mentioned this here or often, but there's this it was Stalin who said, the dictator Stalin, who said the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of a million people is a statistic,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And that's why it's so interesting. There was like there was this instance like where it was, I don't know if it was this year or last year, where there was someone in Wyoming or somewhere where there was a girl who ended up going missing. She was like on a road trip or something with her boyfriend. It was a white woman that went missing, and there was this big news story about it, and it was a
Yeah.
really big deal. And then all of a sudden, people started to get uproar. It was like, this happens a lot to like a lot of Native American people in that area, but it never gets any news coverage. Like, why is this getting news coverage today? And then the story kind of like dropped. Not that it's not any more or less significant or much a tragedy,
Yeah.
but it's like if you hear a statistic of like every year, 10,000 people are kidnapped on a highway, you'd be like, oh my God, that's so terrible and scary. But then you highlight one story and all of a sudden it can be like headlines because it's like you have a face, you have a name, you have a history, etc. And I think that in Arjuna's moment of crisis, who's ultimately encouraged to like still go through with the battle as an idea of 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 higher reality, higher purpose, for a righteous cause. I still think that there's a sense, and we hear this later on in the Gita about the idea of seeing people with equal vision, of how we're meant to see other people, and sort of like bringing the humanity back into our dealings with people, that I'm interacting with another person, or this group of people are individuals.
Yeah.
There's that book. I never read it. I think I've always wanted to, but I think it's called Somebody's Daughter. You heard of that book?
Hmm.
I don't know much. It was referred to me. It wasn't. I heard about it in the context of somebody else, and I imagine through the title and what I heard is the idea of that, like the way that women are treated, specifically mostly by men, and the idea of like every woman is somebody's daughter, and how that adjusts the way if we take that into consideration. Of course, I'm sure there's some people that still doesn't matter or care because some people are certain ways. But
Well,
but
let's
the
pray it.
concept of bringing
Yeah.
humanity back a little bit, and
Yeah.
what we're seeing a lot in the Gita is this humanity of individual stories and Arjuna's story that sets the scene of how we can embrace the Gita lessons of the Gita deep in our heart.
So interesting that you said that because that's going to factor in a great deal in the coming verses and in Krishna's kind of like his explanations and justifications to Arjuna. Um, and funny enough, Draupadi says those words in the Mahabharata at one point. She says, I'm the daughter of a king. I'm somebody's daughter. I'm the wife of the most religious kings in the
Hmm.
world. And so
Yeah.
we'll get into that later. But it just goes to show 5,000 years ago, no issue that you're facing is gonna be new.
Mm,
Krishna's been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, worn it a few times. Like he's
yeah.
not he's not confused or taken aback by any of our issues. And that's
Mm,
always been the greatest solace for me, that It's not like God has no idea of what I'm going through or the
Mhm.
challenges that I'm facing, and I can't turn to God and say, I need some like God level assistance and help.
Yeah,
Not only has God already seen it, but ready to help through whatever it is. Even if we think it's the worst situation that we've ever been in, God is willing to help us through it instead of simply condemning us, never to be seen again.
yeah, yeah. Oh, Krishna, I'm trying to look up this book, Somebody's Daughter. I don't know if it's. Don't know if I just recommended a book that I'd never read before. I'm gonna do a little research. Kimberly, what kind of takeaways you got for us?
Today, we're taking away that God doesn't possess material qualities and isn't focusing on the tiny details. And we are surrounded by mercy, and we can make mistakes, and God will still love us.
Beautiful. Thank you. Chuta, you got a closing words? Closing word?
We can make mistakes. God will still love us.
You can make mistakes. Um, for me, I'm looking at take the time to connect to people's story.
Hmm.
Just take a little time to connect to people's story. Um, all right, guys. Love you all so much. Please be well. Take care. Thank you all a million. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Bye bye.